They came like a storm no horizon could hold. The world of the 13th century trembled beneath hooves that seemed to shake the earth itself. From the steppes of Mongolia, an empire was born in dust and blood, led by men who spoke little, killed swiftly, and carried silence like a weapon. Villages that had stood for centuries vanished overnight, their walls reduced to ash and wind. Word spread faster than armies. Those who defied the Mongols were erased, not merely defeated. Cities burned so bright their glow was seen for days, and rivers ran the color of the banners that marked Genghis Khan's wrath. Yet for those left behind, the families of the fallen, the noble wives of slain generals and kings, another fate awaited, one not written in smoke or fire, but in the slow, endless shadow that followed conquest. When the Mongols arrived, their purpose was not plunder alone. They conquered to consume, to absorb people, cultures, and legacies until nothing remained of what once stood. The wives of defeated rulers became trophies in a world where bloodline and allegiance were the currency of survival. To the Mongols, every union was a weapon, every lineage a tool for power. A captured noblewoman was not merely a captive. She was a message, a seal pressed into the flesh of history. Through her, entire dynasties were reshaped, their heirs born into the bloodline of their conquerors, their past dissolved into Mongol dominion. To resist was to vanish. To survive was to serve. And between those two destinies lay a silence too heavy for words, a silence that stretched across steppe and desert, carried on the wind like a warning to all who still dared to resist. In the ruined courts of Central Asia, the wives of princes watched their world unravel thread by thread. The songs that once praised their beauty were replaced by whispers of fear. Some were forced to stand before the conquerors, their faces veiled not in modesty, but in mourning, mourning the men who had fallen, the children they would never see again, the cities whose names would be buried in the dust. The Mongols did not distinguish between the proud and the pitiful. To them, submission was all that mattered. Yet even in surrender, terror remained. Those who bent the knee were spared only to remember, to live as relics of a world erased. In their silence, the empire found obedience. In their eyes, the world saw the true cost of defiance. And as the steppe winds carried the scent of ashes across a continent, one truth became clear. The Mongols did not simply conquer land. They conquered memory. What they did to the wives of the fallen was more than cruelty. It was the rewriting of identity itself. Every captured woman became a fragment of empire, stripped of name and past, bound to the will of the Khan. What the chronicles called tribute was in truth the quiet destruction of legacy. Their pain was spoken of only in the corners of history, where the voices of the conquered whisper still, soft, unseen, but unforgotten. The empire that rose from the ashes of the steppes did not rest. Once a city fell, the Mongols turned their gaze to the next, as if conquest itself were a hunger that could never be satisfied. In their wake, they left an empire not of monuments, but of obedience. Captives from Persia, Khwarazm, China, and the far edges of Rus were scattered like seeds across a new order. Wives of princes, daughters of ministers, women once carried on litters of silk now rode under a sky blackened by smoke. They became the threads the Mongols wove through conquered lands, gifts, hostages, envoys of submission. In every court the Khan's messengers would appear, demanding the noble bloodlines that could anchor his rule. Marriage became diplomacy, and love a ghost of another age. To the Mongols, family was strategy. Genghis Khan himself had bound his sons to women from conquered tribes, turning potential enemies into reluctant kin. Through these unions he built a web stronger than steel, one that stretched from the Yellow River to the Caspian Sea. Each marriage was a mark of domination, a symbol that the defeated had been folded into the steppes' unrelenting will. The noble women who once carried the banners of their fathers now bore heirs for the empire that had erased them. Their faces appear at the Khan's court, veiled and silent, their eyes reflecting the far-off glow of cities still burning. They sat beside men who had once sworn to destroy their people, now bound by oaths written in blood and necessity. The Mongols understood that power was not only taken with the sword, it was cemented in lineage. Across Central Asia, stories spread of queens, and widows who learned to navigate the new world carved by Mongol steel. Some became counselors, interpreters between cultures, their words shaping treaties and trade. Others vanished entirely into the empire's vast machinery, remembered only in rumors. Yet all carried the weight of the same truth. The conquerors had not just captured their bodies, but rewritten their destinies. The chronicles would later record these women with reverence or scorn: wives of the great Khan, consorts of the horde, keepers of peace. But in the silence between the lines lies a different story, one of resilience amid ruin, of spirits too proud to die, even when everything they knew had turned to dust. And through them, the Mongols forged a legacy that outlasted fear. The children of these forced alliances grew to rule lands their ancestors had defended. They carried mixed blood, the line of conqueror and conquered intertwined. In their veins ran the memory of fire and empire, of homes turned to ash and empires reborn. This was the true conquest, not only of cities and kings, but of identity itself. What began as terror became transformation, until the map of the known world pulsed with a single will, the will of the steppe. Centuries passed, yet the echo of hoofbeats never truly faded. The world the Mongols made did not die with them. It seeped into every border they had broken, every kingdom they had silenced. Trade routes they opened became veins through which ideas, plagues, and empires would flow. The women who had once been taken into their fold, queens without thrones, widows turned emissaries, became the hidden architects of a new age. They carried languages between courts, wove fragile alliances, and raised children who would one day rule in their father shadows. From the ashes of despair rose dynasties that bore Mongol blood. In Persia, in China, in the steppes themselves, their reigns stood as living monuments to the paradox of conquest, that even devastation can give birth to permanence. The Mongols had shattered the old world, yet in doing so, they bound continents together beneath the same horizon. But memory has its own empire. In whispered chronicles and forgotten tombs, the wives of the defeated became symbols of the price humanity pays for power. Their silence outlasted the clang of swords. Their grief outlasted the riders who had carried ruin to their gates. Through them we glimpsed the quiet aftermath of history's loudest storms, the places where voices break, where names are lost, and where survival becomes an act of rebellion. The Mongols built no temples to them, yet their presence lingers in the ruins and along the old caravan roads, in the fragments of songs sung by people who no longer remember why they fear the night wind. What was unspeakable then remains unspoken now, buried beneath centuries of conquest and forgetting. And so the world turns, built upon bones and silence, still tracing the scars left by the empire of the horsemen. Their story is not just of destruction, but of transformation, of how the conquered learned to live inside the legacy of those who broke them, and how the memory of suffering became the conscience of nations. Every empire that rises from the dust should remember the shadow of the steppe, for in that shadow lie the ghosts of those who endured it. Their sorrow is the true measure of power, a warning carved into time itself. If you wish to hear more tales the world tried to bury, subscribe to Hidden Dark History, where the past still whispers its darkest truths.